Thank you very much for this great introduction. I'm really very glad and honored to be here today, participating in this seminar. And of course, special thanks to the Center of Pakistan and International Relations and to Dr. Anna Malik herself, of course, and to Dr. Tahsin Isar. And please take into consideration like all ideas and thoughts will be presented today will represent me, not the government of Iraq. And yeah, it's very sad to still discuss this issue for after a decades of injustices in Kashmir. I will start by highlighting the international organization, the role of international community, starting highlighting the light on international organization reporting atrocities in Kashmir. First, the 43-page report by the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for the Human Rights, which released on July 8, 2019, raises serious concerns about abuses by state security forces and armed groups in Kashmir. And the Indian government dismissed the report as a false and motivated narrative that ignored the core issue of cross-border terrorism. That's the argument of the Indian government, of course. The Pakistani government welcomed the report, and it's a sign of cooperation. And later, the OHCHR found that Indian security forces often use excessive force to respond to protests that began in July 2016, including continued use of bullet-firing shotguns, which have caused a large number of civilian deaths and injuries. The report also decried the lack of justice for past abuses such as killing and forced displacement in Jammu and Kashmir, enforced or involuntary disappearances and alleged sexual violence. It expressed concern over new allegations of torture and deaths in custody. The United Nations Human Rights Office also said that India should amend its Public Safety Act, an administrative detention law that allows detention without charge or trial for up to 2 years. Now, despite international calls, the Indian administrative part of the majority Muslim region, known as Jammu and Kashmir, had its special status within the constitution revoked by the Indian government on 5th August 2019, placing it under tighter central control. Pakistan has argued that the move violates international law. The United Nations Secretary General made a statement in August 2019, recalls the 1972 Agreement on Bilateral Relations between India and Pakistan, also known as the Simla Agreement, which states that the final status of Jammu and Kashmir is to be settled by peaceful means, in accordance with the United Nations Charter, of course. The Security Council held a consultative meeting in August 2019 on this issue for the first time since 1965, when the resolution 211 had been issued and enforcing a ceasefire and calls on India and Pakistan to utilize all peaceful means towards a settlement to the political problem. Now, I would like also to shed some light on historical discourse of Security Council role in Kashmir crisis. I mean, the United Nations has long maintained an institutional presence in the contested area, divided by the so-called line of control. The United Nations Military Observer Group in India and Pakistan observes and reports on many ceasefire violations. Resolution 39 of Security Council established the United Nations Commission for India and Pakistan, UNCIP, on January 20, 1948. The UNCP established function was to investigate the fact that gave rise to the Kashmir dispute and to exercise any mediatory influence likely to smooth away difficulties, to carry out directions given by the Security Council, and to report on the progress of executing the advice and directions of the Security Council. Again, the Security Council also passed Resolution 47 in April 1949, which was and still remains the Security Council outline structure for recommended permanent solution. Resolution 47 set forth a two-part recommendation consisting of demilitarization and plebiscite. One reason for the Security Council, I would call it failure in bringing a permanent resolution to the Kashmir conflict, is the Council's view of the conflict as political rather than legal. From the beginning, the Security Council framed the problem as primarily a political dispute rather than looking to a major legal underpinning of the dispute, the instrument of accession. Now, within this process, of course, one question should be highlighted, which is the right to self-determination, which is a vital component of Security Council resolution. On 5th January 1949, the United Nations Commission on India and Pakistan adopted the resolution that guarantees a free and fair plebiscite in Jammu and Kashmir to enable the Kashmiri people realize their right to self-determination. It was on January 5th, 1949, when the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution supporting the Kashmiri right to decide their future by themselves through United Nations-sponsored plebiscite. The legal situation of this issue is complex. Once it includes human rights abuses, political and legal disputes between two nuclear powers, and of course, these injustices and instability could be used and manipulated by terrorism. In other words, the case of Jammu and Kashmir represent a concern to the international peace and security. Now, I'd like to discuss this issue from a different angle, which is the theoretical background of political choices and moral obligations in John Rawls' treatises. John Rawls' theory of justice as fairness describes a society of free individuals holding equal basic rights and cooperating within an egalitarian economic system. His theory of political liberalism delineates the legitimate use of political power in a democracy and envisions how civic unity might endure despite the diversity of worldviews that free institutions allow. Thus, in reflecting equilibrium, one's specific political judgments supports one's more general political convictions. According to this principle, political power may only be used in ways that all individuals or citizens can reasonably be expected to endorse. Those coerced by law must be able to endorse the society's fundamental political arrangements freely, not because they are dominated or manipulated or kept uninformed. That's very important to understand, that people should have the capacity to be an active partner. Reasonable citizens want to live in a society in which they can cooperate with their fellow citizens on terms that are acceptable to all. Reasonable citizens want, in short, to belong to a society where political power is legitimately used. Rawls' solution to such challenge is for political power to be exercised exercised in accordance with a political conception of justice. The three most fundamental ideas that Rawls finds in the public political culture of a democratic society are that citizens are free and equal, and the society should be a fair system of cooperation. Now, Rawls holds that justice as fairness is the most egalitarian and also the most plausible interpretation of fundamental concepts of rights. Thus, individual does not need to be born into a rich or a poor family, female or male, or a member of a particular racial group, and so on. Citizens are not entitled to more of the benefits of social cooperation or to be favored by social institutions simply because of them. These guiding ideas of justice as fairness are given institutional form by two principles of justice. First, each person has right of equal basic liberties and rights. And second, fair quality of opportunity. Then all citizens should have the familiar basic rights and liberties of conscience, freedom of association, freedom of speech, and liberty of the person, the rights to vote, to hold public office, to be treated in accordance with the rule of law, and so on. The first principle accords these rights and liberties to all citizens equally. And citizens are free in being able to take responsibilities for planning their own lives. In other words, people have the right of choice to plan and run their private and political lives. Rawlsian citizen or individual are not only free and equal, they are also reasonable and rational. So, free and equal, according to Rawls, are privilege any individual should have, while reasonableness and rational, are duties. But these duties should be accomplished only if the individual have his own basic rights. So if the individual feels himself an active political partners, then of course he would feel himself or he would act as reasonable and rational. Role citizen is not utopian since the individual choices and thoughts are affected by the historical discourse and general conditions. It will be very difficult to have reasonable and rational individual if his or her basic rights are not met, including his cultural heritage and religious customs. Injustice as fairness, Rawls calls this reasonableness the capacity for a sense of justice. Citizens are also rational because they have the capacity to pursue and revise their own view of what is valuable in human life. Rawls calls this the capacity for conception of the good. Now, this conception of rights and justice creates the original position, which is a fair situation in which each individual is represented as only a free and equal. The design of the original position models the ideas of freedom, equality, and fairness. Without the original position honored, we will never have a stable, prosperous society and sustainable peace. This is very important since any violation from any side to the original agreements gives the right to the individual to pursue his political choices out of the current non-just context. If the individual feels he's not secured or treated with respect, he will eagerly mobilize to leave this environment. But Rawls' theories not only apply for individuals, since egalitarianism is a basic part of his treatise. Rawls argues restricting the political and religious liberties of a weak minority might endure the system, but threaten the existence of an original position of equality and fairness. And that the two principles, the society, basic institution, should guarantee a public basis for each individual's self-respect. To the end, three factors are indispensably important, which are Constitution should recognize the two principles of justice. The legislative process should be reasonable and rational within the constitutional framework. The political, legal, and social conduct of officials should respect justice and fairness. To ensure fair opportunity, regardless of differences, the state must also fund high-quality education for all, must also guarantee both a basic minimum income and health care for them. Here, I would like to highlight the case of Kurdistan of Iraq as a lesson learned or past experiences. We may all know that Kurds suffered of atrocities perpetrated by Saddam's dictator regime. Not only Kurds, I mean, all Iraqis were suffered, but now I'm concentrating on the Kurds because it has some similarities with the Kashmiri case. There were along other components of Iraqi society victims of Saddam's vicious behavior. In the light of popular uprising in 1991, United Nations Security Council Resolution 688 adopted on 5th April 1991, expressing concern over political repression of the Iraqi people, including those in Iraqi Kurdistan. The Council condemned the repression and demanding that Iraq, as a contribution to removing the threat to international peace and security, end the repression and respect the human rights of its population. The Council insisted that Iraq allow access by international humanitarian organizations to the areas affected, requesting the Secretary General to report on the Iraqi and Kurdish populations affected by repression from the Iraqi atrocities, including Kurdish populations affected by repression from the Iraqi authorities. Using all resources possible to address the needs of the population. To this end, Iraq and United Nations signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to distribute hundreds of UN guards in the north of Iraq. France, United Kingdom, and the United States of America used Resolution 688 to establish Iraqi no-fly zones to protect humanitarian operations in Iraq, though the resolution made no explicit reference to no-fly zones. This experience of Security Council was unique, i.e. the first, by interfering in domestic issues to protect human rights. The Security Council, for the first time, recognized human rights violation as threat to international peace and security. It has important consequences on the future of Iraq, especially in the aftermath of US invasion in 2003. The political leaders in Baghdad and Erbil made it clear to preserve Iraq unity in 2003, and they worked hand in hand to craft a new constitution that promotes democracy and human rights. But unfortunately, despite the successful steps of democracy in Iraq, Kurdistan of Iraq leaders decided to organize a referendum of independence in 2017. Here, I would like to recognize referendum crisis as a crisis of confidence. This situation arose and accumulated due to the political failure that combine the behavior of the political elite. However, the most important reason conducive to the referendum was due to the failure to establish a just social order based on a stable political process, which honors the constitutional democracy. The political elite failed to tackle the sectarian quota system that paralyzed the reform movement, and the whole process was drawn into a game of accusations, especially on successive security failures. The Constitution, which is supposed to be a protector of democracy and the rights of the people, has turned into a great burden on the shoulders of the political process. For instance, Article 140, paragraph 2, which imposes responsibility on the executive authority to take measures to ensure normalization and statistics, and ends with a referendum in Kirkuk and other disputed areas to determine the political choice of the citizens. The delay in implementing the constitution and the failure of the two parties to find, Baghdad and Erbil, to find a sound constitutional structural formula for the relationship led to illegal unilateral action represented in the referendum. This matter does not apply to the relationship between the Kurds and the Arabs only, but rather expands to include the relationship between individuals and groups in general, whether on the political or social level. However, despite the elements of political turmoil in Iraq, the Security Council, through direct and decisive intervention in 1991, has guaranteed special political status for Kurdistan of Iraq, into which at least the minimum standards of Kurds' rights could be met successfully. This kind of role was not the title of the discussion. International community, which has not tackled the issue of essential rights of Kashmir people. The last Security Council meeting was held in 1965 to discuss the political exit of Kashmir crisis. Speaking at an international conference on refugees in February, Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan welcomed the comments and called on the United Nations to do more to intervene over the issue of Kashmir. I quote, "If the United Nations does not play its part, this could become one of the flashpoints in the world," he said at an event where he spoke alongside the United Nations chief. Not to alarm you, but prevention is better than cure. To this end, Secretary General called for the implementation of United Nations Security Council resolution on Kashmir, which dates back to 1948, calling for a plebiscite to be held among Kashmiri residents on whether they would join India or Pakistan. Discussion over the role of international organizations in tackling challenges sheds light on Rawls' law of peoples. Rawls believes that non-democratic and stable society consists of unhappy individuals. And this situation, conducted by fundamentalism and interpretation of what is right, which forcibly imposed on others. This situation has regional and international consequences, especially among overlapped peoples. Rawls described the main ideas motivating his law of peoples as follows. Two main ideas motivate law of peoples. One is that the great evils of human history, like unjust war and oppression, religious persecution, and the denial of liberty of conscience, follow from political injustice, with its own cruelties and callousness. The other main idea, obviously, connected with the first, is that Once the gravest forms of political injustice are eliminated by following just, or at least decent social policies and establishing just, or at least decent basic institutions, these great evils will eventually disappear. The most important feature of the realistic utopia that Rawls emphasizes in the law of peoples is that the great evils of human history no longer occur if all societies are internally well ordered and justice is honored. In other words, to build stable international order, the people's rights should be met since injustices create atrocities and lead to chaos. As a liberal society or a decent society has a basic structure institutions, so Rawls says there is an international basic structure. The rules of this basic structure are coercively enforced. The principles that should regulate this international basic structures thus required justification. The justification of these principles must accommodate the fact that there is even more pluralism in worldviews among contemporary societies than there is within a single society. Rawls put forward 8 principles for ordering the international basic structure, which is people are free, independent, equal, or parties to the agreements that bind them, observe the duty of non-intervention, except to address grave violations of human rights, have a right of self-defense, to honor human rights, and have a duty to assist other peoples. Thus, Rawls also leaves room for his law of peoples to accommodate various organizations that may help societies to increase their political and economic coordination and ensure justice. The actors in Rawls' international theory are not individuals, but societies. He called peoples. Peoples see themselves as free in the sense of being rightfully politically independent and as equal in regarding themselves as equally deserving of recognition and respect. Peoples are reasonable in that they will honor fair terms of cooperation. Indeed, public reason imposes duties of civility upon the members of international society. Government officials should avoid reliance on contentious, parochial reasons that all peoples cannot reasonably share. One major reason that liberal peoples tolerate decent peoples, Rawls says, is that these decent peoples secure for all persons within their territory a core list of human rights. Rawls claims that the parties in the international ordinal position would favor equality and independence. The stability of the international political order will thus be stability for the right reasons. Now, I would like to share some recommendations. The first is that the problem will resolved by the stakeholders, should be resolved by the stakeholders, all stakeholders. Then if they will not find the resolution, then the doors might be open to foreign interventions. And that's very dangerous to the local people of Jammu and Kashmir. Second, justice shall be always the core of any political steps in Kashmir, conducted in Kashmir. Political choices of Kashmiri people should be taken into consideration. The second step should be pursue stability to promote developments and justice. People should have the right to determine their future. Thank you very much.